What I love the most about spatial storytelling is that it puts you as the audience at the center of the action. And I think that's something that's really just so special about the medium of immersive storytelling. So, what I try to do with my creative process is build a choreography of focus. Of you could be looking anywhere in your environment, but you want to be very intentional about where you lead people, lead them through the experience. When does something happen that's large and far away? When do you kind of bring people into maybe a small space?
I think what I'm hearing from you is a level of wayfinding inside the experience, right? For someone to discover something new, learn something new within that space that you've designed. Welcome to Unmissables, a podcast about how leaders in product, design, and technology are building what's next, while navigating complexity, their creative ambitions, and the kinds of questions that rarely have easy answers, but always deserve better ones. I'm your host, Ariba Jahan, and on this show, we explore how we can build smarter and more intentional products, systems, and features. So let's get into it. What does it take to design an immersive experience that feels more like a memory than a moment? Today's guest on Unmissables with Ariba Jahan is Aditi Rajagopal. She is an immersive creative director exploring new modes of storytelling through technology. She's the head of immersive experience design at Atlantic Studios, where she creates educational and entertainment experiences for platforms like Apple Vision Pro, MetaQuest, and beyond. Before Atlantic, Aditi worked as a designer, strategist, and creative director at Meta across India, Singapore, and the UK, building culturally resonant campaigns for brands like Spotify, Samsung, Uber, and L'Oreal. Her work has been featured at festivals like Cannes and South by Southwest. On this episode, we talk about her groundbreaking project that was recently featured at South by Southwest called Cosmos in Focus, how she makes the invisible interactive in her work, why choreography of focus might be one of the most underappreciated skills in immersive design, and what happens when science, motion, and storytelling converge. We also explore what immersive media is still getting wrong, what are some roadblocks to full adoption, what behavioral shifts spatial computing is introducing, and why representation, access, and joy should be foundational, not optional. So if you're obsessed with storytelling or curious about immersive experiences that makes people feel something, I'm sure you'll enjoy this conversation with Aditi. Let's dive in. Aditi, welcome to Unmissables podcast.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
I think the place that I would love to start this conversation, what was the moment you knew spatial storytelling or immersive storytelling was where you wanted to be?
What I love the most about spatial storytelling is that it puts you as the audience at the center of the action. And I think that's something that's really just so special about the medium of immersive storytelling. You can create this sense of magic for people that you can't do in any other medium because you are a character within the story and you get to influence what happens next. And that to me is just a tremendous opportunity from a creative perspective. And I was like, absolutely, yes, I need to get my hands on that.
What was your first entry in?
I guess the first VR experience I had was when I was a student and it was at a festival
Mhm.
where they had this glass box that was like a football field. It was like a mini football field. And then there were two people that would go in and stand on either side, and you had a football at the center. And each person wore a headset. And you were piped in this video feed from a third person perspective. So
Mhm.
it was literally this out of body experience where you were looking at yourself from outside of your own, your own eyes. And then they say, okay, now there's a football in the middle. And then they say, now play. And it just feels so weird to control your body without looking at yourself from your own perspective. And then halfway through that, there's this moment where they switch it, and then you're looking at yourself through the other person's eyes. And it was something so simple, but it was just so strange to feel like you were,
Sounds
floating
trippy.
above. It was
Yeah.
absolutely trippy. And it was so simple, but I think that to me was this aha moment of, look at the potential of what you could do with this medium.
So interesting. So, when you first started in, immersive storytelling or virtual reality versus what it is now, how are you defining it?
I think virtual reality is what the magic of it is that it turns the world around you into your creative canvas. So rather than, a mobile phone or kind of a TV screen, it's like everything around you is your canvas, and that's where the story will unfold. So you feel completely unrestrained as a creator, and that is this huge opportunity to be able to tell stories in new ways and break reality in ways that you can't with any other medium.
So interesting. I love that you mentioned breaking reality because I think what's interesting is there's a level of immersion that happens that it layers on top of whatever is your reality, depending on which medium. And it's fun to see how you can play with that, right? You're the head of experience design for immersive experiences at Atlantic Studios. In a recent, I think, episode you did with another podcast, you said that your work is about making the invisible interactive. Can you tell us a little bit more on what does that mean in practice?
Yeah, I think again the whole point of this medium, and I think the best way that you could use it is to surprise people and then give them an experience that they couldn't have anywhere else in the world. And so one, you can transport them to a completely new place, you can kind of transform their environment. But I think what it means to make the invisible interactive is that you're not just bringing to the fore something that they could never see in real life. You're making the invisible visible, but you're also able to kind of put people in the center of it. And an example is there was a project we did recently with an electric aircraft company that
Okay.
I directed. But what we were able to do is, you can see this aircraft fly around, and it's, fully electric, and there's a lot of amazing technology under the hood. But what you can do is you can visualize the circuits. You could never see all the little circuits and how exactly it works. You can't kind of, lift the hood and look under it. So one, you can make it visible, but also you can kind of feel around and get a sense of how does that work and why does this go here, and take it apart even. So that's an opportunity to kind of interact with the subject matter in a way you couldn't with any other medium. And I think that's really the power of it. It's not just making it visible, but then letting you kind of play around with it as well.
I think one interesting distinction that you just made right now, I think what I'm hearing from you is a level of wayfinding inside the experience, right? For someone to discover something new, learn something new within that space that you've designed. So then if we think about that level of wayfinding versus the wayfinding that we do maybe on a two-dimensional product, like scrolling through your phone. How is designing for presence different from designing for screens?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something that we're constantly learning and constantly
Hmm.
reinventing in this medium, because it is still in its early days if you compare it to maybe film, which has evolved over, just decades and centuries even. But I think for immersive especially, because the entire world and entire space around you is your canvas, you need to kind of guide people. And so
Mm.
what I try to do with my creative process is build a choreography of focus. Of you could be looking anywhere in your environment, but you want to be very intentional about where you lead people and lead them through the experience. So yeah, you try to kind of choreograph each moment of when does something happen that's large and far away? When do you kind of bring people into maybe a small space? Like, do you have a little butterfly that lands at the tip of your finger? All these little moments of joy. I think it's about you really kind of choreograph every single moment and make sure that it's a good experience for the user.
This, could you say a little bit more on, okay, so if you're designing an immersive storytelling experience, like where do you even begin? Do you begin with the end in mind where people are ending the experience, or emotions in mind, or these like moments that you want to create like focus around? Like, how do you begin?
I think it always goes back to the audience. That the beauty of the medium is that the audience can participate in it. The audience becomes your collaborator in bringing an experience to life. And so as a part of that, all of it is centered around your audience or your user. And then you think about, okay, where are they? They're going to put a headset on and they're going to, tap on the icon to join this experience. How do you make it worth their while? How do you give them something that entertains them but also creates this emotional connection? So you think about, to me, I think about it as a journey of you put this headset on, it is something new, you might be in an unfamiliar environment. So how do you bring people into that environment in a way that makes them feel comfortable? And that is everything from, are you sitting down, are you standing up, but how do you introduce them to it using, maybe your voiceover, your narration, the
Yeah.
interactions, and then let people feel more comfortable, because it is new, and when you put a headset on, and especially if you're in a public place or there's other people around you, you do feel a little bit vulnerable. So it's just about,
You become
bringing people in.
self-conscious. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, especially with what do you call it, with Google Glass, and there was this point where people were calling, I don't know, the term like glass hole came about, and there's a lot of people kind of, there is some cynicism when it comes to technology like this
Mm.
sometimes. So yeah, it's just really about how do you make people feel comfortable, and sometimes it's, at the start of an experience, like with Cosmos in Focus that we took to South by Southwest. It was kind of a virtual planetarium. So what we did was, we started in a comfy chair, and so, you put the headset on and it says this works best in a swivel chair. So sit back, relax, and enjoy it. And you would see visibly that moment, that people kind of snuggle into their chair and lean back, and you're like, oh, now you know that they've hit the begin button.
Mm.
So really just preparing people for it, I think, gets them comfortable in the medium, and then they can kind of go out and explore and feel a bit more confident in it.
Before we dive into Cosmos in Focus a little bit more, I'm curious if someone was to come to you, or if someone was listening to this episode and thinking, how do I have a story in mind. I don't know if it's better for immersive or not immersive. Is there a way that you have a little bit of a vetting to figure out what's right for immersive and what's not? And maybe it's not that binary.
Yeah, I think any story can be told in an immersive medium, but it's about telling it in the best way. And so
Mm.
it's, can people participate in this idea? How can people participate and be a part of your idea? So whether that's a narrative story, whether that's a brand, sometimes it's a linear journey. It's just like, rather than watching a movie, you're in the movie and maybe it happens all around you. But you equally could have something that's completely open range, so to speak, and you can fully interact or make any choice to explore an area. So there's many different ways of looking at it, but I think the question is, how can your audience participate in your story?
Yeah, so it's less about should we do immersive or not. It's more about how do we want the audience to participate in this? And then thinking about how to facilitate that. To your point, the choreography of focus, how are we onboarding people into this immersive experience? And then like kind of facilitating that journey.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So interesting. So for Cosmos in Focus, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Cosmos in Focus? What was the ambition? How did it even start? And what is the experience?
Yeah, so Cosmos in Focus is, in a nutshell, an immersive planetarium or a virtual planetarium. And I think a lot of us might have grown up going to, field trips and leaning back in a chair and looking at this dome. But this is kind of that turned up to 11. So you have this kind of, planetarium, and you're able to click on different spots in the night sky and then explore them. But all of these images and all of the storytelling happens around real images from the James Webb Space Telescope. So this project started as a way to say, there's so many incredible images that we're getting from telescopes, and these are all actual images of, the furthest reaches of the universe. This is as far as the edge of the observable. You're able to look into the furthest reaches of the universe, and the edge of the observable universe, and it's just so incredible that humans have been able to do this. And so you see these images and they look gorgeous, but what do these images actually tell us about the universe and our own place within it? So it's just about, an opportunity to, explore the universe, but also understand our own place within it. And how this project started was, it's a bit of a passion project within Atlantic Studios. We did this on stolen time between other projects, and we had a conversation with scientists from the University of Sussex here in the UK, and we were like, they just completely melted our brains by telling us about the work that they do. And what they do is they analyze these images to kind of tell us about the universe and how we fit into it. And so we're like, how do we take, the most complex, most abstract things that they're doing in math and in code, but then let people have an emotional connection to it? And so we're like, how do we make a planetarium feel like an emotional experience, but also one where you are in the driver's seat and kind of control what you're seeing? So that to me was, a really precious opportunity to be able to tell a
Yeah.
story, and yeah, and just feel a little more connected to, our place in the grand scheme of things.
So in that instance, what were the ways you guys identified the moments of focus or the choreography of focus? Were there distinct things that you're like, okay, we definitely want this to be something that is a focal point of the story or a focal point where people interact with the environment around them?
Yeah. So how we built this was, first there's an education piece and an emotional
Yeah,
piece. And so what we did in terms of how we got people into the experience is that you start off by looking at a model of the James Webb Space Telescope in your environment. And you kind of see this 3D model, and you're introduced to it, and it's like, this is the largest and most powerful telescope that mankind has ever built and launched into space. And that in itself is a huge accomplishment. And it's crazy when you think about it. It's like we've sent a camera out in the universe, and it's sending us images of
information.
just
Yeah.
incredible things, and it's sending it to us over the radio. It's all just absolutely incredible. And so you start with this model of this telescope, and there are little hotspots, and you can explore different parts of it. So you learn about the instruments, you learn about the sun shield, you learn about how big it is, and how it came to be. And then you have this button that then takes you in to explore the universe. So then the telescope kind of moves upwards, and then this dome descends over you, and then you find yourself at the center of the universe. And so that's a moment where you kind of, as the telescope floats upwards, you look up, and then that's when you have this oh wow moment when the universe kind of descends. And we had people at South by, when they saw that, there was like a lot of people who went, holy shit, it's just this moment, you're like, oh, now I see the universe all around me. And then you see certain stars that kind of stand out to you and that you're able to click on. And when you click on those images, I think what's been really magical about this is we create the sense of zooming through the universe. And so what we did is we took multiple different telescopes, have imaged the same parts of space. So, it's like different cameras from different angles and different levels of zoom have looked at the same point in the universe to give us different images. And when you stack those images up, you can kind of zoom from, what it looks like now to look up at the sky, and go further and further and further to look at these far, far away galaxies, but in incredible detail. So, by kind of superimposing them, we create this feeling of, you zooming through the universe to arrive at these points. And then once you're there, there's tons of incredible insights. Like you can see the way that gravity kind of warps space-time. You can see the oldest galaxies that humans have ever observed. And there are a lot of incredible stories that are just there. It's just one image, but there's hundreds of really beautiful insights kind of hidden behind them. And we just wanted to let people connect with that a little bit more.
I mean, that sounds so magical. My son and I have gone to 2 planetarium shows so far. One was at the New York City's Museum of Natural History, and another one was, I think, more of a local museum of science. And both of them were so incredible. And I watched, you go into them thinking, oh, this is magical for him. But truly, all the grown-ups in the room were equally, just like amazed by the magic of what we're able to for a moment, almost teleport into the space, seeing planets and galaxies and the stars, and learn something new, as well as remember something that you might have learned in like 4th grade or 5th grade, right? Like, so it's really interesting that you kind of merge education as well as that emotional capacity to connect with like the space. Yeah, one of the ones we watched was Sesame Street.
Oh, I love that.
It was so cute. It was, I think it was Elmo and Big Bird and a few other characters who were traveling through space and discovering or like landing on the moon and walking on the moon.
I think to me, the joy of being able to share that story is also the way that the universe is a lot like us. So you have things like there's these big columns of gas, but that's where stars are born. And then it's kind of like this region is almost like a stellar nursery where tiny baby infant stars only a few million years old are kind of all hanging out and forming. And so it just kind of connects back to our own lives. And I think
Yeah.
that just gives you much more of an understanding and empathy for the subject matter that I think was really fun to bring out.
I just imagine the working sessions between you and the scientists, how fun that must have been. Like, were there any, what were some of the ahas or learnings maybe on a personal level that you had working on this with them?
I think, I mean, firstly, it's just such an incredible opportunity to be able to work with these experts and people who know so much about a topic, but are also so good at kind of dumbing it down for people like me who have, a high level understanding, kind of, but I have a lot of stupid questions. And I think that is kind of the key to bringing out the best of it is, don't be afraid to ask stupid questions. That was a huge learning for me is, it's like, okay, explain it to me a little simpler. And there might be, this is really kind of high level, very complex, often theoretical stuff. But, they sometimes in explaining it will come up with this analogy or a metaphor. So there was this one quite complex concept called gravitational lensing that's about how you see distortions in the images that but actually what that is that when gravity is so strong, it's kind of tugging at the edges of space-time, and that's why you see these images that look a little stretched, and it looks like a glitch because it is a glitch in reality. And so when they were explaining it to us, they said it's like a magnifying glass that's made out of gravity, and so that gives you something that you understand in the scope of your own life and something that might be sitting on your desk. And so that kind of back and forth in, I don't understand, simplify it, and kind of, playing around with, is this terminology still fairly accurate, and being able to bounce those ideas around is kind of where the magic of it happens, I think.
And then for you to think about how do we then let that be experienced, right? So like even if you learn the terminology, like how do we then contextualize it and bring it into this experience, right? Wow, okay. So interesting. So what happens next with Cosmos in Focus?
So we debuted that at South by
Hmm.
Southwest in
Right.
Austin, which was incredible. We had, people really resonated with it. We had two people in headset that like were moved to tears. So I got, we kind of put someone in it and they came back and it was a wet headset, which was very sweet actually. I didn't expect for people to connect with it that much. So it was a pleasant surprise. But what's next for it is, I'd love to take this to a few more festivals. We're hoping we can take it to Venice Immersive later this year. But ultimately, it's great for education. So what I would love to do is eventually put it out on an app store so that anyone with an Apple Vision Pro, potentially for us to eventually build this into an iPad experience. I'd love for more people to get to experience and connect with the stories that we're able to tell in this
Yeah,
experience.
so amazing. Yeah, I hope you're able to bring it to more festivals so more people can experience it. You hit on this really early on today where you were talking about some people are like skeptical about spatial experiences or spatial technology being a medium at all for storytelling. For people that are tuning in, what do you wish people understood more about immersive storytelling or immersive media?
What I wish people understood more is that I think where it was kind of born in gaming a little bit. So I think
Hmm.
sometimes people think of this as a gaming device or, oh, it's for kids. And, much like an analogy is like, I guess hamsters, people think of hamsters as pets for kids, but they're not, it's just people, it's just an association that kind of comes about. They're actually, very complex creatures. So I would say similarly, it was born in gaming. So people think about VR as kind of a gaming headset, but I think it's so much more than that. It's just, an incredible tool for education. It's incredible, for brands to connect with audiences in new ways. But I think where that challenge comes from is in people having a certain set expectation. So what I wish more people would understand is that the potential of this medium is a lot more. It's so powerful for being able to create empathy, because what you can do is you can transport people to a completely new place, but you could also put them in the shoes of someone else, and you can imagine what it's like to live a day in someone else's shoes. And so it's just a really powerful medium and vehicle for empathy, and I think that its potential in completely different contexts is a bit misunderstood or underused, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to dig more into that because I think when VR was initially popularized, where we were seeing it the most was people creating really immersive stories and then bringing it to their fundraising efforts, right? So it was a way to immerse potential funders into the lives and experiences of where the nonprofits donations would be going, or like that type of a bridge, right? Like that was a very common use case. What are some contexts that you think should be explored more or people just don't know about?
I think, yeah, that is one really, really powerful one. I think in personal storytelling, it can be incredibly powerful. One of my favorite pieces is called Letters from Drancy. it is a 180 VR film, but it's a woman who survived the Holocaust, and she's in her 90s or pushing 100, but she's kind of recalling being in the back of a van and holding her breath with her mom while a flashlight kind of searches it, and they put you in the back of a van and you can kind of see that as she's narrating it, and it's just such a visceral way to empathize and connect with another person and their
Yeah.
stories. So I think that is one of the most powerful ways that people could use the medium, and I think it's being done in incredible ways. Another one is, I think about embodied history, and
Mm.
so being transported into a place, like a place in history or another place that you could never go to, or you probably can't go to in your lifetime. So imagine being able to kind of turn back time, and you might have places that are now in ruins, but imagine what they might have looked like in their heyday. And take people into ancient history or interact with characters from it. I think there's just so much potential in kind of giving people experiences that you couldn't have in any other way.
Yeah, so interesting. It also just made me think about the other popular use case, like immersive training, whether it's surgical expertise or manual manufacturing expertise, right? Where do you think we're headed? Like, what do you think we'll see more of in the coming years in immersive media and immersive experiences?
That's a very good question. So there's definitely a lot of investment in it from tech companies, with Apple entering the game. Meta acquired Oculus, but then both Apple and Google have kind of made plays in that space. There's HTC, and there's a lot of, I think there's this range of, from the highest fidelity, expensive headsets, but also more affordable ones. And I think that there are potentially two ways in which it could go. I feel like you have augmented reality, which is interfaced with your phone. You have full virtual reality that replaces your environment. Those will kind of keep going until they meet in the middle with kind of glasses. So you like Google Glass a little bit, but maybe the next iteration of it, and maybe the market will now be ready for it, is that you can have glasses where you can see your real environment, but then you can have that as an overlay. But I think there's also two different ways that it will go in terms of, is it entertainment or is it utility? Because if you have glasses, I could see that going more into kind of the Apple Watch territory of you have your little notifications pop up, and that might be more like a lightweight but utility layer that you can interact with
Mm,
through the day. But I
right.
think the other side of it is more about entertainment, of being able to have the largest possible TV screen and view something that's that comes into your space, and that's, I think, a different use case. So I'm curious to see where it will go, but I think it's just going to get smaller and smaller, but more and more embedded into our everyday lives.
Thanks for listening to Unmissables. We've just relaunched, and I'd love your help in bringing more listeners to the show. If this conversation has sparked something new for you, take a minute to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating on Spotify. It really does help people find us. Thank you so much. And now, back to Aditi. Where do you think spatial design is still failing its potential?
I think currently the biggest challenge is in distribution, is that
Okay.
very few
Yeah.
people have headsets.
Yeah.
They're not cheap, they're quite expensive, but also it is kind of, you do it solo. So you're largely, you're looking at something amazing, but it's not, you can't really sit around, on the couch with your family and share that experience. I think, say, for example, if I wanted to call you, I could, I call you and your phone rings and you can pick up and we're connected. But to do that with a headset, currently I need to put on a headset and then you need to put on your headset. We both open the same app and then connect. And so there's currently no way to like ring someone up on a
Yeah.
headset, right? So that's
Right.
kind of the threshold energy it takes for two people to have that shared experience is currently a little higher. But also, if I am physically, I'm in my space and I'm having this amazing VR experience, and if I have other people sitting next to me, they are currently outside of it. So I think one is just the number of headsets of,
Mhm.
quite few people have access to it. But yeah, I think as the form factor becomes smaller and as they become more and more affordable, then people will be able to kind of reduce that threshold energy and connect kind of much faster, much more easily.
Yeah, I'm remembering a time where I had the Oculus headset on, right? And I was at a bar,
Yeah.
and I wanted my friend to meet me. I had no idea how to do it. And I texted her the app I used, the location, and it took a while for us to find each other in that space, but eventually it did happen. But by the time that happened, it kind of lost a little bit of its magic. of like, oh, meet me there, right? So speaking to your point, like even though the technology or the feasibility is there, it's not as immediate as what is IRL experiences, right? Like it's not
Hmm.
there to mirror it quite yet. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think another kind of challenge for it as a medium is about the time spent of, in
Mm,
its current form factor, it's like you can maybe, spend 20, 30 minutes in it. And then after a while, you might feel like it's a little heavy, and things like that. So, it's just with the PlayStation, you're like, oh, I could do that for hours, or you could scroll for a very long time. But currently, it's like at some point, you're going to get a crick in your neck. So it's also a form factor and kind of battery life thing that I think is, yeah, a limiter at the moment.
yeah, I mean that part actually goes back to what you were saying earlier about whether it's for utility or entertainment, right? So if it's for utility, and then we think about Meta's Ray-Bans, Meta's glasses that are way lighter, that you can wear around all day long, and that has a very specific use case where you can do things, but it stays with you, and it's light enough to stay with you. Versus, I would say the Oculus is super heavy. I think for me, I would always get nauseous after about 25 minutes. And so are we only at a point where the form factor meets the use case, and then eventually that won't be such an issue anymore? It'll be more fluid.
Yeah, I think so. I think eventually it's always going to be a trade-off, I think, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like when you have pass-through, like you do with I mean, the Meta glasses, at the moment, you don't have kind of visual overlays, right? Like they have
Right.
that prototype, but at the moment, it's largely kind of audio. It's still open. You can still participate in the world around you. And I think that's kind of where a lot of these companies are headed as well, is mixed reality that lets you continue to participate in your environment and with people around you, but then you have an overlay over it. So I think that's kind of the key of like retaining your connection to your environment while you're still having this kind of magical experience is probably where it's headed.
Yeah, so I think for our listeners, we can talk about maybe the spectrum, right? Like I think the overall terminology that Apple kind of popularized, was it last year or 2 years ago, spatial computing. And within it, we've got a spectrum all the way from completely immersive, where you can't see anything of your own reality, all the way to, not all the way, but somewhere in the middle is mixed reality, where there's an overlay where you can still see your own environment, but there's an overlay, whether it's an overlay where you can only see it, or overlay where there is some sort of an interactivity to it. And then I guess all the way to the other side is maybe the most minimal amount of information that's overlaid onto you, right? Would you say that's kind of the spectrum, or am I missing something?
Yeah, I think that that is a spectrum, and I think there's the one other thing is how close it is to your head, I guess, is that you have head
Mm-hmm.
one like virtual and
Right.
mixed reality, and then I guess you have augmented reality where rather than it being kind of something that's on your head, you have an interface or a screen, whether that's your phone or an iPad or a tablet, that just gives you this window into this this mixed reality world is probably the one that's the most accessible, but is maybe
Mm-hmm.
the least believable in terms of feeling like you're actually in that other world.
Definitely. And I feel like with AR, the expectation is different. You don't want it. You're not walking into an AR experience thinking it's going to, I guess, replace or put you into a whole different space, but like something you're adding on to your own reality,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So you talked about where you think things are headed. Where do you want it to go? Like, what would you love to see more of in the next 5 years?
What I would absolutely love to see is just
Hmm.
more diverse stories.
Yeah.
I think one thing that happens because of the price barrier is that it means that there's also an access barrier. And, when these headsets start at about $300 and upwards, going up to, thousands, it means that not that many people have access to it, and that becomes a financial barrier. And so what I'd love to see as these headsets become cheaper and more accessible is more diverse stories being told on them, the stories from, for, and by people from the global south, or people from India, people from Africa, the Middle East, and more places where that price tag at the moment seems quite high. So I just love to get to see stories from more people becoming more common on the platform. At South by, for example, I went to an XR creators dinner, and
Hmm.
it was really great to meet people from a lot of parts of the US and Europe, but there's definitely not as much representation from South Asia, Southeast Asia, what I saw at that level. So I'm hoping that that will change in the next few years.
When it comes to the creator side, right? Like, what do you think are the barriers?
That on the creator side, I think AR, augmented reality, was really great for that because a lot of these are free software. So I think Meta used to have Spark AR Studio, Snap has Lens Studio. A lot of them are free. So it means that any creator, if you have a phone and an internet connection, you can be building for these platforms. Whereas as you go more and more into, virtual reality and headsets, you end up needing to work with, something like Unity, which is a paid program, for example. And then that means more education, and you'd have to go learn it from potentially a university that needs to have the resources to give you headsets to be able to test on and things like that. So both on the hardware side and on the software side, there's kind of more and more investment that's required to let people get access to and play with the platform.
Yeah, I mean, from a perspective of if someone is in the work of storytelling but now wants to do more immersive storytelling, what's a way they can get started without, I guess, going back to university?
Yeah, no, that I love that question. I think the more accessible ways to do it, I think, would be to play with no code tools. There's one that I really love called Spline Design, and it's a web-based tool that lets anyone kind of, play around with 3D objects. And you can also do, without coding, you can make interactions. Like when you hover, this happens and things like that. And that platform is, free. It's completely web-based, so you don't even need to download anything. And they have an app on the Apple Vision Pro. So you could build something, just off of a website, and then you can view it and make an interactive experience, a simple one, but, on the Vision Pro, which I think is pretty great. And I think the other way of doing that is, filmed content is that, you have these Insta 360s and, 360 cameras that you can get quite cheaply, but being able to film content and take content from the real world, anyone that has a film background or even doesn't, you can kind of place it somewhere and then capture content from the world around you and then bring that into headset. And a third one that is I'm particularly excited about is Gaussian splatting and LiDAR. I don't know if you've dived into that a little bit, is that this technology is advancing so quickly, is that, you can turn text into 3D models, or you can turn a photo into a 3D scene. And how quickly that's improving means that, I could, within minutes turn my studio into a space that you could put a headset on and you could walk in my studio. So I think that's really powerful as well. And the more that this technology evolves, it just means that more and more people can get started working with, spatial computing and immersive storytelling, which I think is really exciting.
I'm just taking all the notes so I can try these tools myself too. Um, that's so interesting. I think that's what I think we're kind of at that point, right, where emerging technologies, emerging experience has gained enough traction where new curriculums include them, but people who had traditional education or not traditional education now are at a point where like, well, how do I get started, or what's something I can play with? And I think what's so powerful is this era of no code tools, right? Like talk about access, where it's really amazing. When you design immersive experiences, so now taking the point that you brought up about diverse stories and diverse voices, not only from a lens of who can access this technology from an experiential point of view, who can create for this technology from an education, as well as being able to have the privilege to play and dabble in this. The third lens feels like more of the responsibility that maybe you or your team takes on when you're thinking, we're going to create this. What's our responsibility to make sure that this experiences and stories we're creating represents the real world out there? And or what other layers of responsibility do you think you stay grounded on that listeners and other immersive storytellers should also?
I love that question because I think, this speaks also to accessibility. So
Mm-hmm.
access, but also just making sure that, your experiences are built to work for as many people as possible. So I think one, from a production point of view, it's everything from, just make sure that if you're doing a voiceover, think about all the different voices you could have. There is no one default accent. There's different ways that you could tell a story. So just make sure that you're one considering, have a diverse slate when you're thinking about things like voiceover, and make sure that you user test with people that have are right-handed or left-handed or different heights or different backgrounds from you. I think, the biggest pitfall is in assuming that your audience will use your experience the same way that you do. So, I always try to, user test with other people from my company that are, not on the immersive side, people like from the finance team or IT who, come in completely looking at it for the first time and think about, what's natural to them, people who aren't playing around with headsets all the time. And I think another important part of it is accessibility, of, making sure it's readable, making sure you don't have, quick cuts that might trigger someone's seizure, and making sure that people can use it, just with one hand or standing or sitting up. And, I saw this even at South by Southwest, where we had someone who just had one hand that they could use and they had limited mobility, but they were able to kind of use and experience the cosmos in focus. And I would have felt so amiss if I had built something that required very complex interactions and I had to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't use it." It's just a shame if you don't think about how you can make your work as widely accessible as possible.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think as someone who identifies as being disabled, I have hearing loss. My headphone on my right ear is really for just so that the AirPods actually work. I can't hear anything at all. So oftentimes there were certain immersive experiences I've done where the audio was bifurcated. So what would happen is whatever audio was distributed to my right side, I just couldn't hear it at all. And that's a very simple way you can tell that they didn't account for someone who can't hear out of both ears, right? Just a simple design decision. So what you're saying also makes me think about, what narratives end up being centered in spatial storytelling and what still gets kept on the mark. One through line throughout this whole conversation is an element of behavior, whether it's physical behavior in terms of the way that we behave with the thing that we consume or the thing that we touch, what is normalized versus what is being broken as a result of immersive experiences. Have you noticed through your years of experience in this industry, like certain behavior shifts that are happening as a result of more spatial experiences becoming more popular?
Yeah, I think, you have that already with screens. I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest shift you'll see if, you talk about, like iPad kids and kids that are digital
Yeah.
natives that now, feel like they want to zoom in by kind of pinching, and they do that out in the real world because they're used to seeing it happen like that on the iPad. So I'm like, this might be the next iteration of that. But
Yeah.
I think that kind of leads into how people use these immersive headsets as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of, for example, Apple's headset is a lot of the design choices mimic what you might see on an iPhone. So, you have that little bar at the bottom of your iPhone that you use to kind of unlock it, and you see that bar at the bottom of every window you have. So it's like that is what you use to kind of grab and move around an app. And so, I think behavior translates from kind of 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. But one very interesting one I found doing a project as well is about when you try to scale something. Some people go like this, like they like to
Uh-huh.
use both their hands, and some people like to go in and out. So it's like
A
it really
pinching.
depends. If yeah. So everyone has, I guess, at the moment there isn't one universal sign for it. More and more you'll start to see everyone maybe homogenize the way they think about it. But I think there's something kind of beautiful about, the differences in how people experience it, because, I need to then step out of my head and think about, what do you recognize as a sign for scaling? What
Mm-hmm.
feels natural to you. And I think it's just what's nice is that, you have to be empathetic, not just in the stories you're telling, but how you build these experiences, because other people are going to want to move through the world in different ways from you. And you have
Mm-hmm.
to constantly be thinking about that when you're building experiences.
That's so interesting. Okay. I didn't realize like 2D behaviors were translating so well into 3D. Okay. Okay. Got it. What's one unmissable shift that's happening in immersive storytelling that more people should be paying attention to?
I would say the one unmissable shift is that people are really, really pushing the boundaries of what we thought we could and couldn't do. Is
Mm,
that, a few years ago, we might have said, oh, you can't do movement in VR because it makes you feel sick. You can't do quick cuts in VR because it makes you feel sick. And so these were things that were kind of hot button issues and people just wouldn't touch or wouldn't do in immersive filmmaking or immersive experiences. But now more and more people are interested in kind of breaking those rules. Like you start to see people saying, you can cut, but if the pace of the music is fast enough, then people are kind of expecting action to be faster. And so you see a lot more people who are looking back at, certain rules of filmmaking, but redefining that for the immersive age. And I
mm,
think all of it is also centered around kind of, human to human connection is that a lot of people initially would say, "Oh, we don't do close-up shots of people because it feels like you're looking at them much larger and that can make you feel a little strange or, like you're in a
Claustrophobic.
different scale."
Yeah.
Yeah. But more and more, I think it's like, as you're telling a story that makes you connect with someone, and in that you kind of put someone really close to someone, you then don't notice it. So I think what's really great about it is this resurgence that's happening with more tech players investing in it, is that people are going back to what they thought was the rule book and ripping it up a little bit and saying, let's start from scratch and let's just see where this medium can take us. So I think that's really exciting, of kind of going back and
Yeah.
being like, let's just kind of
Did
build
that
from the
need to
ground
be a
up.
rule? Right. Because what I'm also hearing is that it's less about one rule fits all versus a rule for a specific audience, specific intention, a specific moment within the experience versus like, yeah, maybe don't zoom in for the whole 50-minute of an experience versus if there's a moment of intimacy that you're creating, a moment of someone whispering a secret to you, then that's an intentional close up that you're creating, right? So interesting. Okay. Aditi, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Before we close down, I'd love to know, for people that are listening to this and thinking, you know what, I do want to do more immersive storytelling. I thought it wasn't a space for people like me, but I want to do more. Is there any advice you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, I would say absolutely do it. I think, get started however you can. I think it can feel really daunting because it might feel like a lot goes into it. But I think, get started with whatever you can get your hands on, whatever tools, whatever experiences. And I think any kind of interactive experience that makes you feel joy is the core of what we're trying to build. So whether that's with the highest end headset or through your phone or even a rich website that's really exciting and fun, it's just about just try to find a way to center your audience and give them this little moment of joy, and you'll see the dividends from that for sure. So I would say, look at no code tools and dive in head first. I think it's only going to get easier and more accessible from here.
I feel like that advice probably also holds true for brands too. Just start somewhere, not start somewhere, start. And then if they need to work with a specific agency or like specific partner to bring something to life, cool. But like that starting feels like a good place.
I think so. And I think especially for brands, it can feel very daunting because like XR is all about giving up control a little bit, is,
Yeah.
putting your audience in the driver's seat. And for a brand, it can feel a little scary to let go of control. But I think it's really about, leaning into it and seeing what people will do with, the framework that you give them.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much, Aditi, for making the time to be on this podcast today on Unmissables with Ariba Jahan. I hope your cat feels better and I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun to chat with you, Ariba.
Alrighty. Thanks for listening to the Unmissables with Ariba Jahan podcast. If today's conversation sparked something new or made you think differently, be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. And if you're enjoying the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review. It really helps more listeners find us. For past episodes, show notes, and the unmissables I'm paying attention to, subscribe to the newsletter on Substack or visit unmissableswithariba.com. See you on the next episode.